Hi, everybody. Welcome to Conversations with Calvin, We the Species. Chronologically, hey, June 19th. It's Juneteenth today. It's the national holiday today. And I'm with Chris Bjork, and professor at Vassar and an author. We're going to do a lot of talking about that. We just made a comment about the heat. 2 days ago, I wore a sweatshirt here in New Jersey because it was cold and damp and raw. And I stuck my head out a little while ago and it was hot. And then I looked at long range weather forecast and it'll be flirting with 100 degrees all next week. Welcome to the world of global warming and climate change. It does exist, but whatever. Maybe it doesn't. Whatever. It's going to be hot. So, Chris and I met last week to discuss his book, which is called More Than Just a Game. And this is about as timely and important a topic as there is because it's sports and it begins at a young age. And he's going to dissect that and analyze that because sport as we know it has changed irrevocably forever. And in my own opinion, college sports doesn't really exist anymore. It's all professional sport. And that trickle down stuff to young people, how is that going to affect the minds of parents and children participating in all these wonderful areas of sports at middle school and high school. So I mean, it's all changing, and it's so important. Chris's background is phenomenal. We just talked about the fact that he got a PhD from Stanford, one of my favorite schools, because Stanford has always been the quintessential university, excelling at the highest level in everything. Academics, top five in the country. Athletics, always top. Just we'll talk about. There's a lot of stuff to talk about, and it is life, and it's real, and it involves all of us in one shape, way, or form. So, monologue done. Chris, why don't you do a little background and get us caught up, and then we'll plunge into this.
Right.
Take it
So
away.
as you mentioned, I teach at Vassar College in the education department, and I've been doing that for about 20 years, working with talented young people who are planning to become teachers. And my research is focused on comparative and international education with an emphasis on the effects of high stakes testing, mostly in Japan and Indonesia. But for the last 10 years, one nice thing about working in academia is that when you get tenure, you have a little bit of security and you can take chances. And so my co-author and I decided that we had been fascinated by the phenomena of youth sports, both as well as coaches, as parents, as board members, you name it, as fans. And yet we found that there was so little reliable information out there. Almost everything that we could get our hands on presented extreme pictures of the youth sports industry, either that youth sports was destroying our youth or that if kids spend all the time and effort they possibly can, they're going to strike it big and make it in the NFL or the NBA or whatnot. But there was very little kind of impartial, nuanced studies of the effects of youth sports on kids. So we decided that was something that we were prepared to take on, and we've spent the last 8 years studying youth sports. We started out by following four travel teams in our area over intensively over a period of 2 years. And then after that, we've been interviewing student players, coaches, parents around the country to get their perspectives on youth sports. And more specifically, we've been looking at the effects of the commercialization of the industry. The youth sports industry is now a $19 billion industry, which was not the case when we were kids. And we found that a lot of parents and families like us were having trouble making sense of the current status of the youth sports industry because it looks almost nothing like what we experienced. And so we wrote this book with the goal of providing parents with information that would help them make good decisions for their kids.
Perfect, perfect. So timely. It's so important and timely. on so many levels. Um, so was there a particulate of motivation while you wrote this book? I guess you just kind of,
Well, to get a little bit more specific, I think that both of my kids played sports, one very intensely, and I was a coach for a few years. And I realized that when you're in the middle of it, it's hard to get a healthy perspective on what's going on because you get so emotional about it, especially when your kids are involved. And I thought it would be really helpful to step back and look at what was going on outside the purview of a parent or a coach. And we thought that that perspective would help give us some kind of fresh insights into what was going on. And we did find that. And it forced me to reflect critically on some of the things I had done as a parent and a coach and mistakes I had made. And we wanted to give parents information so maybe they could avoid some of those pitfalls.
okay. Um, so who do you think would like benefit the most from this?
I would say anyone who is connected to the youth sports industry, whether it's as a parent, a player, a former player, we talk to referees, college coaches, you name it. Hopefully, they'll get something out of the book. But I would add that a lot of the observations we make reflect on broader trends in our culture that aren't limited to just sport. So, one of the themes of the book is that youth sports has gotten so intense and competitive, and that parents today feel a lot of pressure to do whatever it takes to help to make their kids exceptional. And that is on full display in sports, but also I would say in the arts, in all sorts of extracurricular activities, you name it. Being a parent requires a lot more investment in time, effort, and money. And a lot of times that translates into putting pressure on kids that isn't always healthy for them.
Not necessarily related, but slightly off topic. My son is involved in the spelling bee, and I almost call it sport because
Yeah.
it's produced and it's like a sporting event. And I know the kid who won it, I watched because I watched the spelling bee on Ion TV for 2 days, 2 nights because it is it's a sporting event, an intellectual sporting event, but nonetheless. But and this may pertain to the work you're doing with the youth sports industry, but I'm convinced that this young 12-year-old who won, who was the run-up last year, but I'm convinced that with his encouragement of his parents, he must have spent 4 hours a day for 365 days a
At
year.
a minimum, I would say minimum of 4 hours. And it's funny you mentioned that because we did spend some time looking at the investments that parents make in their children's activities. And we found that there's this trend, no matter what activity you're considering, to sign your kid up for private coaching or special training or intensive summer programs. And spelling is one of those. And so there's an industry, it's a cottage industry of private spelling coaches who charge up to $300 an hour to prepare their clients to compete in these spelling bees. And that, that's an extreme example, but in sports, it's hard to avoid that pressure to sign your child up for a private hitting coach or a trainer or a consultant, because another business that's sprouted up is these consultancies which charge money to get kids ready to apply for college scholarships and get the attention of college coaches and scouts. And so they help them develop online profiles and videos and send out letters to coaches and things like that. There's nothing that these entrepreneurs have left unturned, at least as far as I know, that has the ability to make them some profit and, in theory, give kids a competitive edge.
Wow. So interesting that I did bring up the spelling bee. Like I said, my son is involved in it, and so that's why I watch it intensely.
I think
And
spelling is a great example also because if you think about, so when we look at different sides of whatever activity we're talking about, as I mentioned, people tend to fall into two camps, and spelling kind of highlights that. You could argue, and I'm sure many people do that, it's a great investment of time and money to have your kid practicing spelling words 6 or 8 hours a day, and on weekends, if that will get them to the Scripps national championship. But then there's another school of thought that would question that and say, what are our goals for our kids? And what lessons are we telling them if we're, when they're 10 or 11 years old, encouraging to spend every waking moment, obsessively focused on one activity? And I'm sure you can tell from my tone of voice that our conclusion is that usually is not a good idea, and kids don't, in the long term, benefit from
right,
obsessively focusing on one activity.
yeah, it is an obsession. It has to be to basically memorize the entire dictionary, but learning the roots because the roots give. I wasn't aware of that. And the root of a word may give the spelling away. I mean, it's so intense, things that you would never realize. Anyway, to brave the world.
Yeah.
Did you learn any new things about in your research and doing this? Did you learn any new things about the youth sports industry?
Well, we focus in the book, we focus on the impacts that changes to the youth sport industry have had on families. And we did pick up on some really interesting trends that we didn't expect. So, one thing that we hope readers will take away is that um, most parents start off with really good intentions for their kids. They're looking out for their sons and daughters and want them to be happy and healthy and have a good time and make friends. And so when they initially sign their kids up to play CYO basketball or Little League softball or whatnot, their intention is just to give them a worthwhile activity to spend some time. But because of the way that the industry has changed, that tends to shift really quickly. And so when kids are 8, 9, 10 years old, they are given these signals and they experience this pressure to start specializing in one sport. And parents, because things are so different today than they were, 20, 30 years ago, aren't sure how to respond to that pressure. And because of that uncertainty, they generally go all in out of a fear that if they don't sign their kid up for the private tutor or coach, if they don't have them play basketball 12 months a year, they're going to lose out. And they have to position them for success when they're 8, 9, 10. And if you think about it, most kids at that age, they don't know what they really want to do. If you talk to a kid when they're 8, their interests are likely to be very different when they're 12 or 13. But because of the way this whole business is set up, a lot of them have decisions made for them before they can make their own decisions. And parents um, are kind of influenced by what the media tells them they should be doing and what their friends are doing, and not necessarily looking carefully at what's best for their individual child.
Do parents have, I'm sure they do. Do parents have misconceptions about the youth sports industry?
Well, a big one has to do with the ultimate payoff of investing in their child's sports careers. So again, comparing the current situation to how things were when I was a kid, when I was in high school, if you excelled on your high school team, college coaches would pay attention to you and you might end up at the University of Alabama or whatever college. But nowadays, this private sporting industry has sprouted up, and it is taking precedence over, school sports. And so parents sign their kids up for competitive travel teams or academies when they're very young, and very quickly, the ultimate goal becomes getting them a college scholarship. And so you asked about misperceptions, and I would say the main misperception out there from my perspective is that a lot of parents think if their kid makes it onto this travel team, that they're going to be a really strong candidate for a college scholarship. But in actuality, only about 10% of high school athletes get college scholarships. And so parents are misguided and they think because they're spending so much time and money on their kids' sporting careers that there will be a payoff at the end of the experience. And that's just not likely to happen. And another important thing to consider is these private teams, these travel teams have gotten so expensive that even if a kid gets a scholarship, there's a good chance that the parents will have spent more money on all the training and competitive activities leading up to college. So what we really hope parents will take away from the book is think more about your kids' long-term development and don't let the allure of a potential college scholarship drive your decision making.
Okay. Okay. Um, all right. Just an interesting question. Listen, media is all over the place in every shape, way, or form about all this. Uh, what and media just pummels away on our sensibilities and all this youth stuff and what do you think media is missing when they're spraying all this stuff into our worlds?
I would say it's not one particular fact or you know idea. It's more a mispresentation of the realities of sports for kids. So it makes sense though, because they're trying to get viewers, writers or reporters want to get as much attention as they can. So they tend to present extreme stories. And so for example, I bet if right now we went and looked and Googled youth sports competition, there'd be lots of videos of out of control parents attacking coaches or referees or losing control themselves, and as if that's a widespread phenomenon. And it is disturbing, and we should be concerned about it. But the number of parents who get to that extreme are fairly small. And what we conclude in our book is the parents that we should be thinking more about are the kind of center group that can be swayed in either direction, and they aren't as out of control as those images suggest, but they lack information and they're easily persuaded to do things that may not be wise. And so the media kind of leaves parents with this false perception that ends up preventing them from looking at issues from both sides of the spectrum and thinking about, not just the extreme examples, but what their kids' daily lives are like and how sports might affect that.
Okay. I just want to go off topic, completely off topic. I borrowed this question from one of my favorite journalists, Barbara Walters. So I don't mind bring it up from time to time. It's in my back pocket. I like it. It's kind of provocative, and you don't have to answer it if you don't want to. But
Sure.
so here goes. Excluding family or friends, Chris, somebody living or dead you'd like to spend a day with.
Hmm. Well, since we're talking about sports, I feel like I should pick, um, an influential. Well, here's something. Here's an idea. I attended a conference, a youth sports conference last year in Baltimore, and there were some really phenomenal speakers, and one of them was Cal Ripken Jr. And he spoke, and so I have heard him talk, but I would love to have a conversation with him. And the reason is he is this, phenomenal athlete who reached the peak of his sport, and yet his message is similar to ours. He's suggesting or trying to convince parents not to take their kids' sporting worlds too seriously. He, like us, believes that there should be more balance in kids' lives. That, for example, And this is another thing that might surprise a lot of parents. Cal Ripken, as well as a lot of physicians, argue that young athletes are actually going to be much better off if they sample many sports in a year instead of playing one exclusively. And it helps them develop all sorts of different muscles,
Oh,
dexterity, and it also is really good for their mental health. So I would love to just have a conversation with him to get more insights from him and to hear how he managed to make it to the top levels without becoming obsessive about one thing.
okay. Great answer. I like that. I like Cal Ripken because he and I share the same first name.
Yeah.
There you go.
But it's funny, we also interviewed a lot of college coaches, and every single one we interviewed had that view that the best thing that kids can do as they're developing is to sample many different sports, many different activities, not to, focus too much on a single one, not to specialize at an early age. And all the research backs that up and says, we're not saying don't specialize. That isn't our view. We're just saying wait until kids are mature and their bodies have developed and they know what they want to do, which is usually, around middle school.
Hmm. Okay. Okay. One other off topic, real fast. Do you have any favorite movies?
To Kill a Mockingbird, without a
Okay.
doubt. It's always been my favorite book and my favorite movie. It has nothing to do with sports, but I just
Oh yeah,
love the characters and the story and the mood. I still watch the opening credits of that and get sucked in right away.
yeah. We actually have friends whose kid named their kid Atticus.
I love that.
In this modern day,
Yeah.
like wow. And I marvel at Gregory Peck. And I've read a whole bunch of stuff about him. I continue to read stuff about him, what kind of an actor he was and how committed he was to his profession. And I marvel at the role he took in Gentleman's Agreement, um, notwithstanding.
Another great one that isn't connected with sports, but is focused on kids. And because I work so much with teachers, really appeals to me is The Water is Wide by Pat Conroy. And
Okay.
it's his story of going to teach in the Deep South in a really poor community and what he did to connect with kids and how rewarding it was and the struggles he faced. And so I love an inspiring teacher story.
Did he also write Conrack?
Yes.
And that's a similar theme, a teacher in the Deep
Right.
South on a little
Yeah.
island.
Yeah.
That was I watched that kind of a heavy movie. It's funny, I some a couple of years ago, I love sport movies. I love, I could watch Rudy again and
Yeah.
again. And it's funny. I would love to do research on that movie and the effect it had on Notre Dame when it
Yeah.
came out, and even on Notre Dame's enrollment and how many applications, because it just elevated and took Notre Dame. It's such an inspirational, true story movie. Um, but a while back, I just had this need to watch Bang the Drum Slowly. Uh,
Robert De Niro.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you call it a sport movie, but it is. He's a baseball player and he's
Yeah.
dying. And one of the more haunting spiritual things in my life took place that 2 years ago, thinking about that movie, and I wanted to listen to the song "Bang the Drum Slowly." So I went to YouTube and I clicked on it, and there were a whole bunch of different listings of the "Bang the Drum Slowly," and the top of the list was Emmylou Harris. And so because I'm a little OCD, it was about midnight. It was a music video filmed in 2017 in conjunction with Memorial Day. So the video takes place mostly at Arlington National Cemetery, and there's a funeral procession with horses and soldiers and a casket in a horse-drawn wagon, and soldiers marching, and then there were little vignettes of people mourning at the cemetery. and it briefly switched over to the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. And I just got glued to the words and to the melody, and I watched it literally for hours. And then the synchronicity in the universe. The one scene that gripped me the most from the sports movie and from this video was a soldier, a comrade, kneeling at the grave of obviously a fallen comrade of his. And after 3 hours of watching this thing and listening to this amazing music, I realized that the grave was Michael Luis Gonzalez, and I had interviewed Michael's
Wow.
mother uh, 14 years ago when one of my first interviews as a journalist. I interviewed the mother. She was a Gold Star mother because she had lost her son in Iraq, and there at 3:30 in the morning was her son Michael. All from my wanting to watch a baseball movie.
Wow.
It's powerful stuff.
Yeah.
So, all right, back to work. Uh,
Okay.
Back to work. So, what did you learn here about parenting and family life today?
Many, many things, but one thought that pops into my head is that family life has become so much more complicated since when I was a kid. And one thing that we discovered is that the bonds that tie neighbors together have really dissipated. And so uh, mothers and fathers today tend not to feel closely connected to their neighbors. So if they have a problem, I can't think of the exact statistic, but it's something like 60% of adults surveyed said that they don't know the names of the people who live on their street. And that has all sorts of implications. And one of them is that parents too are searching for connections. So they don't always find the relationships that will give them strength in their neighborhoods. And for that reason, these sports connections can be really powerful. And we discovered that parents, now because they're spending their time with these teams all year round, several times a week, going to tournaments and games in different cities and states, they become really closely connected to other sports parents. And in a way, that's a really good thing. We had parents tell us that they spend holidays with their travel team and they use the term families. They go on
Yeah.
vacations together, which is fantastic. But it also creates this echo chamber where a lot of parents are surrounded by people whose views mimic their own, mirror their own. So they lack this kind of perspective that parents used to get when their kids were doing many different things and they spent a lot of time with their neighbors. And that in many cases leads them to make decisions that aren't good for their kids because everyone around them is doing the same thing and telling them, yeah, send your kid to that intense summer soccer camp, or yes, sign them up for a private conditioning coach. And and they all reinforce these extreme tendencies, which can be really problematic. Parents need connection, but they also need balance.
Okay. Um, in researching uh, more than just a game, in researching, and it's kind of a generalized question, but maybe not. What does your research tell us about society today?
Yeah, well, there's lots of lessons. One has to do with the intensification of almost any kind of activity that people take part in, and a lot of that is driven by economics. So when you and I were kids, we could sign up for Little League, and it would cost almost nothing, and our parents would maybe bring oranges to a game or something, and that was all that was required. But become so profit driven that nowadays parents um, have to go all in and invest a lot of money in their kids' extracurricular activities. So one of the takeaways is that what's happening in sports is mirroring inequality in our broader society. So not all families can pay the money that it takes to stay involved in these competitive leagues. And a lot of times it's upper middle class white families that can take advantage of those opportunities. And inner city kids may not, kids whose parents are working 2 or 3 jobs cannot. So it just exacerbates troubling trends in broader society. Um, and the other thing I would say is that um, parents need to be careful because sports has become profit driven, just like spelling has become profit driven. And so we all have to be really cautious when we're asked to fork out big sums of money. And it's hard to say no when it has to do with your kid, but sometimes your kid will be better off when you don't decide to spend $5,000 on their hockey activities. Or one of the parents we interviewed said that they invested $30,000 a year in their child's ice skating
Oy.
career each year.
Wow.
And so it just goes to show
Wow.
you how the opportunities provided by offered to kids have become increasingly shaped by the
Wow.
family's, socioeconomic status.
Wow. I'm listening to you. I'm saying to myself, what a great profession, and a teacher, skating
Yeah,
teacher.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
My goodness. And I think Scott Hamilton, all he did, won the Olympics and blah. Wow. 30, I can't even, wow.
Yeah.
What has been the response so far to the book?
We have heard from so many parents and coaches who are really grateful that we've shown the light on these issues because, as I mentioned, you may think that coaches are really in favor of this trend in specialization and the idea that families will spend all year round focused on, but the coaches um, really see problematic aspects of it, and they love it when their athletes, the kids who do make it to the college level, have played different sports and done different things and have a sense of balance. They tend to be mentally more stable. They tend to be more enthusiastic. So the coaches, believe it or not, have reached out to us, say thank you for doing this work, and then parents too. A lot of parents have said, you're shining a light on something that we see but no one's talking about.
Okay. Okay. If parents were going to apply one finding that you made in this book to their lives, what would it be?
Can I hedge and give you two?
Sure, you can give me three if you
Oh,
want.
okay. So one is that just the whole idea of doing whatever they can to create balanced lives for their kids. To not go all in if they can resist that pressure, encourage them to take part in I don't know, arts activities and different sports and student government until the kid really knows what they want to do. Um, and the other one that I haven't brought up, but I think is really important, is that based on what I've said, you might assume that I think all the coaches out there are set on preying upon kids and they have no sense of values. That's not true at all. We came across many, many amazing coaches, and there are these wonderful, inspiring coaches who don't put excessive pressure on their kids. But the parents need to go out and find them. They need to do a little research, talk to other families, talk to coaches before they decide what team to sign their kids up for. Watch a practice, see which coaches are screaming at their players, and see the ones that are kind of encouraging them to achieve their goals, and find those coaches out because they're there, and the kids will benefit from that investment of effort.
Okay. There's a whole science
Yeah.
to finding the right. Yeah. Uh, I mean, slightly off topic, but how much? Well, I'm looking at the example of these two guys. These they were last a year ago. They were number two and three in the country in basketball, in high school, and they both decided to come to Rutgers. So with the understanding that they're so good, they'll only stay a year and then they're going to go into the
Right.
MBA. So my question, which is a dovetail, is uh, I'm 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 just wondering, listening to you and the whole thing about coaches, was the institution of finding the right perfect kind of coach for them, was that a consideration and they're making the decision, or they know they're just going to hang around for a year and they're just gonna go into the MBA? Uh, uh, so in this vast world of ours, do parents really look at college coaches, especially if they know their student athlete
Yeah.
is not going to go into the MBA or WNBA?
Right. We were looking mostly at, 6 to 18-year olds. And so when I say parents should do a little research and seek out coaches that they really think will inspire and support their kids, I'm talking about mostly younger kids. Um, and the reason that I emphasize that is so I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation that when I look back at the decisions I made as a parent, I can see some mistakes and things that I would do differently. And like many parents, I didn't really know that was an option. I just assumed you play for the team that's closest to you or that your kids' friends are playing for, and that's what you do. Um, and in retrospect, I think it would have been really a good idea to have a broader vision and to talk to more people, to look closely at my kids' um, personality and goals and all of that, and find a coach that was going to be a great fit because it was possible. Um, a related point, though, is that we also found that one troubling trend is that when parents have spent so much time and money supporting their kids' athletic careers, they kind of many of them lose sight of their ultimate goals. And the reason I mention that is that because they're so intent on getting their child college scholarship, athletic scholarship, they forget what the point of college is. And so a lot of parents will send their kid to a mediocre college that will put them on the baseball team when they could be going to a really, vibrant, exciting academic institution that may not care so much how good they are at baseball. But I would argue, and I'm a college professor, so I'm a little biased here, but I would argue that that young adult is going to be much better off if they go to a school that really engages and challenges them and maybe play baseball at the club level or at the intramural level, um, and not let that dominate the decision-making process.
Agreed, because the percentage of college athletes going into whatever professional level, both,
Minimal, minuscule.
it's so small. So it should be the college experience, the academic, the whole. It should be that because
And if a young athlete is talented enough to play at the D1 level or at the pro level, they're going to shine no matter where they play, right? If you're that good, it isn't going to make a huge difference if you start specializing when you're 8 or if you play many sports until you're 13 or 14. I mean, Michael Jordan's the most common example of that he didn't make his high school varsity basketball team until his sophomore year.
correct.
And that I don't know how accurate that story is, but I think it's worth considering.
Yeah, it's funny. There was a thing on Michael Jordan. So it was a reel that popped up on my Facebook thing the other day, and I watched it. He made maybe the most incredible shot in the history of basketball. He and I watched it about like 5 times just to digest it. I didn't remember it, but he went airborne, and he stayed in the air for so long that he was able to do all this. And he went under, and then he went up and around, and he twisted his body, and then made the layup off the backboard. wow. And he's a billionaire. He's a billionaire because he's smart and everything he did with lending his name out to Nike and Air Jordans. So he's a billionaire, which is a good segue to my last off topic. We discussed this briefly before we went on air. Um, you read and I read almost at the same time that the LA Lakers was sold to the guy, Richard Walter, I think is his name, who owns the Dodgers, as a matter of fact. It's a whole conglomerate. The guy presides over 325 billion in investment stuff. But anyway, so they bought the Lakers for $10 billion, and listen, a lot of that comes into what you wrote. So and then I did some research and I looked it up. Dr. Jerry Buss bought the Lakers in '79 for $67.8 million. A lot of money back then, a lot of money. And I just can't fathom, maybe you can shine a light for me. We discussed this briefly. I can't fathom $10 billion for 12 players, which half of them are going to be gone, the following year anyway. They're either retire, they're going to another team because they want more money. I can't fathom, and this is all under the umbrella of sport.
Mm.
You're concentrating on younger, but sport is sport. So, Chris, I just can't fathom 10 billion for nothing other than a name.
Yeah. But it highlights the concentration of wealth throughout our society and how that's really on display in sports. And the Lakers story is an extreme example of that. But I would assert that we see those effects at all levels of the sporting hierarchy, and it's starting to have an impact at lower and lower
Yeah.
levels. So now, for example, there is this trend in private equity viewing youth sports as a potential investment market.
Wow.
And, and I think part of it has to do with parents' willingness to shell out big bucks because they want their kids to have these competitive advantages and they don't always make rational decisions. And when these kinds of opportunities present themselves, parents will spend, and we did see this a lot, spend beyond their means to try and give their kids a leg up. And money is kind of dominating the whole, you know, scene, the whole industry.
Oh, I could ask you a million more questions, but I won't.
Okay.
I won't. We can save this. Hey, we're kind of finished the prime essence of this. Please come back. You and William come back. We can do panel. We can do anything because I mean I love this stuff and I live it and I live it and I breathe it and I marvel at just where sports going. I marvel just last night I was watching a blurb about the WNBA that it is achieving things beyond imagination with viewership and
And it's
support.
so great to see women's sports getting the attention and the financial support that they deserve.
Correct. Truly deserve it. It's funny. I in my modern era, I was drawn because I covered it as a journalist, women's soccer, and actually my company, NJ Discover, broadcast women's soccer, professional soccer from Rutgers Stadium, Ursac Field, and I got a chance to meet a whole bunch of some
Wow,
great,
that's great.
yeah. And I thought to myself that it's kind of pure. There was more of a purity to, especially women's basketball, because I've been going to women's basketball at Rutgers for, I started getting involved like 20 years ago, and my son's high school in girls basketball was ranked in the top 10 in the country. Uh,
Wow.
and when I'm such a groupie. When I heard that, when I heard that, and when these girls were sophomores, I started going going to high school girls basketball. It was like wow, and I went just about every game for 3 years because they were really, really good. And I actually nudged the Rutgers assistant coach to come see these. So they were one player away. They were one player away from immortality. They needed a real tall center. And if they would have had a tall center, they would have been an immortal basketball team. Of course, there's some, we can talk about this, come back. There are some elements to how that team got put together, which we won't get into now. That's for another day, another time. But I was a huge fan.
Yeah.
And I marveled, as I marveled at Caitlin Clark. I discovered her in her sophomore year at Iowa, and I started watching because I subscribed to the Big Ten Network, and I was a basketball player. I almost tried for Chicago Bulls in '76, so I was a player of sort, and I just marveled 3 years watching her. Wow, and what she's done to help. Paige Becker's from Connecticut, also, and Maya Moore. I mean, I was really into women's college basketball.
And if I can end my notes on a positive note, that reminds me of a lot of the female athletes that we covered and interviewed, that we studied, derived incredible benefits from sports. So, parents and female athletes told us that on the playing field, they developed these leadership skills that were really valuable on and off the court. They developed resilience. They had drive. Parents told us that their daughters had really positive body images because they
Right.
saw themselves as strong women. Um, and that wasn't always the case when they were in situations with other boys. So, I hope people realize that sports can provide amazing benefits for boys and young men and young women
Yeah,
if the parents help them develop a healthy attitude toward their sport and give them the support they need to
yeah,
succeed.
yeah. In passing, this whole podcast that I'm doing is because of Rutgers sophomore triple jump record holder, Claudine Smith. 4.5 years ago, I met her on LinkedIn, and we sent some messages back and forth. We connected, and she seemed so grounded. It wasn't that I had stereotypical views, but I mean, she was a college kid. She was a Gen Zer, and so after a few messages back and forth, the following week, I said, "Hey, can we talk on the phone? I mean, you seem so grounded." She said, "Yeah, sure." So again, triple jump record holder at Rutgers. We talked on the phone, and a week later, she was just so. I was just so impressed. I mean, I didn't know what to expect, but she was just so Claudine. And a week later, my daughter-in-law is here, and off topic, I yelled at her, "What is this thing called Zoom?" So she came here, she set me up with Zoom, and then the light bulb went off, and I called Claudine. I said, "I got this great idea. I think I want to interview people like you to
The
do
rest
the
is
show."
history.
The rest is history, and it began with her, and she was my first interview.
Right.
And then she did another thing, that the thing that went on at Michigan, Michigan State rather, with Larry Nasser, all that, and so she did a thing about athlete A or something like that, whatever. But anyway, hey, this was great, Chris, and so
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
this was great. Come back. We'll stay in touch. I'm going to stop recording. We'll do a 2-minute wrap, but this really for me was fabulous. Thank you.
My pleasure.